If you've ever taken a public speaking course in high school or college, you know what it's like to stand in front of an audience and speak about a topic and how nerve-wracking it can be. I've got a 20-year-old son right now taking a public speaking class in college, and I was recently talking to him about it, and I said, look, the reason why you get nervous when you're talking to an audience in a public setting is because you're not confident that you know the material, and you're afraid that someone in the audience might know the material better than you, and you might say something that's objected to and make a fool of yourself. That's really the cause of most of our nervousness when we speak in public. And the only way to overcome that, there are two ways to overcome it. You can just fake confidence, which is what most public speaking classes teach you to do. Or you can actually seek to have real confidence in speaking by studying so diligently and becoming such an expert on the topics that you speak about that you know for certain that what you're saying is true. That's the true source of confidence in public speaking. And teaching is simply one form of public speaking. And one of the challenges for a good teacher is that the teacher is responsible to teach students at present based on his current knowledge. And he tries to do so as broadly and deeply and effectively as possible. And yet at the same time, that teacher is studying and learning and growing. And some of his opinions or convictions change as his studies continue. He gains more experience, he gains more knowledge and understanding, and things that he taught before, he no longer believes them to be true. And we see this among history's greatest teachers. We see it, for example, in the life of St. Augustine, who had to take time to publish retractions, where he retracted or took back things that he had said and taught in the past, because as his wisdom and understanding matured, he changed his position on certain issues. Now, these are normally minor issues that occurred after his conversion to Christianity, but nevertheless, he realized as he continued to study and matured intellectually and spiritually, he realized some things he had said maybe in a former letter that he had written or a treatise that he had written, something wasn't accurate, something wasn't truthful, and so he took time in retractions to clarify those things and point them out. Another famous writer who did that was Geoffrey Chaucer. He did the same thing. Later in his life, he published a set of retractions where he admitted some sense of guilt for some of the things that he had written because he felt that they were too immodest and things like that. So we see even among history's greatest authors, greatest teachers, greatest speakers, we see an experience where they are corrected in time and they need to retract something that they've said. It's just a necessary evil in the work of teaching. And as teachers, to be responsible, we have to try to make this happen as infrequently as possible. And the way we do that is by limiting what we talk about and teach about to topics and issues that we're relatively certain about, that we've studied carefully, that we know what the authorities say, and we can be pretty confident that we're not going to need to change this in the future. Now, for me, what's interesting in my looking back at years that I've spent teaching publicly, and when I say teaching publicly, I don't mean teaching in a private school as I did when I was younger. I mean since 2008, so 15 years, I've been teaching publicly in the sense that everything that I've been teaching has been published on the internet for anyone to watch or read or listen to. And it takes some courage to be willing to put things out in public because you have to accept the risk that something you say might be refuted, or someone might find fault with it, or like I said, that you may change your opinion with further study and then have, let's say, videos that have been published and books that have been written or articles that have been published, and have this imperfect teaching get around and have no way to really get it all back and retract it. So it's always an anxiety for a conscientious teacher to be really careful not to get into subjects or topics that he may just be totally wrong about. And I feel pretty confident that in all of my public teaching since 2008, the articles I've written, the videos that I've produced, lessons that I've written for students, I feel like my teaching has been pretty consistent because I've avoided getting into areas that might get me into trouble in this way. But there's one issue that recently I've realized that I had wrong. One important issue. It's a topic that I've talked about on a number of occasions, and something I felt very strongly about. But in recent weeks, I've had experiences that have really persuaded me that what I used to think and what I used to share with others is not true. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit in this talk and retract things that I've said before and make this really clear based upon my recent experiences. Now, when I became a Catholic in 2006, I was a very strong Protestant. I was very well taught Protestant. I knew my Protestant faith very well. I knew the scriptures very well. And it took a lot for me to become a Catholic. But when I became a Catholic, I was very strongly persuaded about the controversial issues that separate Protestants and Catholics. I was very strongly persuaded on the authority of the papacy. I was very strongly persuaded about the truth of the sacrament of holy orders in the Catholic Church and of apostolic succession, of the ministerial or sacramental priesthood. I was very strongly persuaded on those issues because I was actually considering a career in Christian ministry before I converted to Catholicism, and the issues that related to the papacy and the priesthood and holy orders, I studied them very carefully, and I became just 100% convinced that Catholicism was true on those issues. And that was sort of the source of the river of Catholicism for me, and then all of the other doctrines and views sort of proceeded from that conviction with regard to holy orders. So I came into the Catholic Church very strong in believing in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. And let me make it clear, this is not the issue that I'm changing anything on. I remain 100% strongly committed to the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, and I trust in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. That's not the issue. So don't get excited. As I settled into North Carolina, we were in the midst of this conversion process, and we moved to a town, Monroe, North Carolina, where my parents had retired, and there is one Catholic church in the county where Monroe, North Carolina is located, one Catholic church in the county. And fortunately for us, it was in our town. So Monroe is the center of Union County in North Carolina, and Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church was in Monroe, North Carolina, just about 8 miles away from our house, which is really out in the country, but close enough for comfort to downtown Monroe. So we went to the local Catholic church, met with the priest there back in 2005, 2006. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head. And we were received into the Catholic Church at that time, and we made Our Lady of Lourdes, we made that church our home church. And again, this was in 2006. So my oldest child, Jonathan, was just 6 years old when we converted and became members of the local, and I mean geographically local, the only Catholic parish in our county. So my oldest child was 6 years old. That was in 2006, so 17 years ago. And at that time, we had 4 children. So they were 6 years old, 4 years old, 3-year-old, and I guess 1-year-old, around 2005, 2006. So that's where our family was at that time. And we were received into the Catholic Church, and we just started attending the local parish church. Now, our experience in the local parish, I can describe it honestly as being terrible. It was very difficult for us. We had left behind some of the most beautiful Protestant communities in the Northeast. Beautiful culture, beautiful music, excellent teaching, devout church members, devout fellowship and community, intimate relationships with fellow Protestants, lots of friends in the Protestant church. I was actually teaching the classics in a private school at our Protestant church. So we were very intimately connected to a wonderful Protestant community. And we had just sort of gone through a conversion from Reformed Baptist to Anglicanism, classical Anglicanism, or what's called Reformed Episcopalianism. So between those two, even though we made a move from one to the other, we loved both of them. And we enjoyed the richest of Protestant culture. But the need to convert became obvious, and we converted because of the doctrine, because of the Catholic faith. We converted to the Catholic Church because of our conversion to the Catholic faith. So the faith came first for us. Persuasion of the doctrine of the church came first. Membership in the church came afterwards, and we sort of accepted church membership unconditionally because we were converted because of the faith, not because of what was actually on the ground, but what was on paper in terms of the published and official faith of the Catholic Church. So we became members at the local parish, and as I said, it was terrible. There was little to no fellowship among the members of the parish. There was no teaching in the parish. There was very little support for families in the parish. All of the music and liturgical activity of the parish was disorganized and chaotic, and it was cacophonous, if you know what that means. It just sounded terrible. And we came into the Catholic Church at that time, and that was very upsetting to us, but we were, again, converted because of the doctrine. And so we felt ourselves, in a way, married to the church for better or for worse. And when I said the church, I mean our local parish. And because of where we live, it wasn't like there were 20 options to choose from. There was one option. And for us, that was our first real experience in the Catholic Church. I grew up attending the church a little bit in central New Jersey, which I had fond memories of, but that's like nothing. It was a few years when I was a kid, and that's it. But for us, this was our first real introduction to the Catholic Church, and we were committed to it for the sake of the Catholic faith. So time went on, and priests change, things change over time, and thanks be to God, many of the things in our parish got better. The church became much more organized. The church came much more beautiful. Things were done in the church to make it more beautiful, to improve the music, for example. I mean, when we were leaving the church, because we've chosen to leave this parish, which is what I'm going to talk about, when we were leaving the parish, the music at our parish was not the problem. It was beautiful. We had a great cantor and a great organist, and that part of the life of the church was beautiful. But there was never any fellowship. There was never any community. There was never any teaching. There was never any support for families. Nothing for the children. And their experience, my children's experience, was terrible at the local parish. So much so that my adult children now, even though most of them continue to attend Mass, they struggle to even attend Mass because of the effect that this parish had on their thoughts of the Catholic Church. And if you ask them, what's tempting you to not attend Mass? What's tempting you to move out from the church? Is it because your parents didn't teach you the faith? They would say, no, it's got nothing to do with that. We've learned the faith. We've studied the whole Baltimore Catechism. We've read the scriptures. We've prayed the Liturgy of the Hours as a family. It's not that we don't understand or don't like the Catholic faith. That's not it. Well, what is it? Were your parents hypocritical, and were they put a bad taste in your mouth for Catholicism based on your relationship troubles and things like that? They would say, no, we have great relationships with our parents. We have very intimate, close-knit family relations. That's not a problem. And if you were to keep pressing and ask, well, what really is it? What is it that on a Sunday morning makes you not want to go to Mass? And every one of them will say, our parish priest. And that's just an honest statement of fact. They will say, our parish priest, and they'll name a few other things maybe, like the culture in the church, things like that. There's nothing to do in the church. There's no other, there's not many other kids like us in the parish and things like that. But the number one reason they will give is the parish priest. Now, any time that they would have said that, and I'm talking over the past 15 years, I would have corrected them. I would have said, that's really not fair to say that. He's ordained to this ministry. He's fulfilling his ministry with his own unique set of strengths and weaknesses, of gifts and lack of gifts in other areas. And we should just be thankful for the ministry that we do receive and not be critical of the ministry that we don't receive, because it's just not really proper for us or respectful for us to judge the ministry of somebody else. And I always corrected them on that, and I made sure that we spoke respectfully of the clergy all the time, and we weren't critical. We rolled with the punches, as it were. We dealt with things as best we could, and we really thought that being faithful to the local parish, continuing to attend, continuing to support, continuing to try and help, having a positive attitude towards the parish and so on, was the best way that we could manifest our Catholic faith and help the church rather than stand in judgment over the church or criticize the church. And anyone who's listened to my talks or followed my discussions, read any articles that I've written on these matters will know that I have always preached submission to the church, respect for pastors, and so on. That's been a constant theme in all of my writing and teaching through the years. But this past year, we've come to a point in our family where our children are older. Our youngest child, Anna, my daughter, she just received First Communion. So we're finished with baptisms as parents. We're finished with First Communion preparation. We're finished with First Reconciliation. And our seventh child just finished his requirements for confirmation. So we've got 3 children left in the family, Anna and her 2 older brothers, Isaiah and Daniel, who are still in this period of sacramental formation in the church. But we came to a point, really maybe the first time in the last 15 years, where we had something of a window that was open, where we didn't have kids in the midst of sacramental preparation and things like that. And we just decided, because of the negative attitudes of our older kids towards the church, and even our own, silent dissatisfaction with things. And remember, we're also experiencing other churches and priests and ministries through our Dominican chapter and formation. So a few weeks ago, I guess 3 Sundays ago, we decided, for the first time ever, for the first time since we converted to Catholicism, to visit another parish on a Sunday morning. And it's a relatively close parish, closer than I ever realized. This is one of those things where once you realize it, you can't believe you never saw this before, almost as if there were, like curtains being kept over our eyes through the years. But we knew that there was a parish across the South Carolina border, and it seems to be a vibrant parish full of families with kids, and the priest at the parish is a relatively well-known priest and writer and speaker. He's been on Fox News. He's been all over YouTube. He's on social media. He's written a few books. He's a professor at a local Catholic college. And we finally started to listen to some of his homilies and talks, and a couple especially that impressed me. He leads the parish in Bible studies, and some of his Bible study talks are just amazingly good. And I was really surprised how helpful his teaching was, how deep he went into teaching the scriptures. And I was thinking, this is parish Bible study. This isn't like a college course. He's teaching this to the parish. I think it's like on a Wednesday evening. So after all of these things, we decided 3 Sundays ago to visit. And when we got there and settled down, the first thing that we realized, and we've Dania and I have commented on this again and again over the past 3 weeks, is that we felt like we were back in the Protestant church, in the sense that things were so beautiful and orderly, and there seemed to be such happy fellowship among the church members. And the attitude of the pastor was actually pastoral. He was a teacher and a preacher, and we could feel that. And what we both commented on was the fact that we felt like we were back in our old Reformed Baptist church in New Jersey, not because the church is like a Protestant church in its teaching or anything like that, but because the feel of the church was just so orderly and beautiful and intelligent and devout. And every detail had been set in order, and you could just see the faith is loved in this place. These people are proud to be Catholics. This priest is proud to be a Catholic priest and loves being a Catholic priest and loves the Catholic faith and loves the church. And you can immediately feel that spirit as soon as we walked in to the sanctuary. We could feel that. So for the first time ever, we attended a different parish on a Sunday morning. And what was amazing was when I mentioned to my kids and realized my kids are older now. So my youngest is 8. I've got an 8, 11, and 12 or 13-year-old, and then a bunch of teenagers and a couple adult children who are in college, who are home during break times and back on campus during school. But I've got an older family now. Dania and I are almost 50. We're 48 years old. Our oldest is 23. Our youngest is 8. And all of us had just gotten used to going through the motions on Sundays, getting up, getting dressed, going to Mass, punching in, punching out, going home. And that's what it felt like to go to Mass on Sundays. And Dania and I would occasionally go to weekday Masses, but again, it was punching in and out. As soon as I mentioned to everyone that I was thinking about going to a different parish, I noticed all of my kids were interested and excited about going to Mass that Sunday. They wanted to go to a different parish. It was important for me to realize my kids weren't really interested in not going to Mass. They were not interested in going to Mass at our parish. That was the problem. When I mentioned the possibility of going to another parish, they were all excited about it. And I told them, look, the standards are different. These kids of mine, my younger kids, they never experienced our life in a Reformed Baptist church or in a classical Anglican church. They never knew that culture. They knew the culture of our local parish, which was pretty low. So I told them, we're going to ratchet things up a bit. You've got to get dressed more nicely. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to get ready for Mass. You've got to be more respectful, because this is a different place. This is a different spirit, different environment. And contrary to what everyone would expect, they were excited about that and eager to go. And as soon as we went and, in the van on the way home, I just started to get all of the good feedback. We love this place. We like this place. We like this preacher, this priest. The music was beautiful. The sanctuary was beautiful. All this positive feedback, which I had never received from my kids at our local parish. And during the week, just during random rides here and there, to work or back, or giving a kid a ride someplace, I would notice, at their initiative, talk about going to church on Sunday and how they were excited to go back to this new parish and how they liked this new parish and so on. So it was surprising to realize how much of an effect it had on the kids, both the opportunity to go to a new and better parish and what had been their experience at our old parish. So we've continued to do this, and we've officially decided to leave our local parish and become members at this new parish. And we leave our old parish with no trouble. There was never any trouble. Dania was a faith formation teacher. Our kids served at the altar. There was never any problem for us at the old parish. We had some friendly relations with a few of the people there, like people who worked in the offices, the deacons, some of the other volunteers and things like that. But there was never really any fellowship. But at the same time, we left on good terms. I mean, the parish priest and the deacon wrote recommendation letters for Dania and I when we decided to apply for entrance into the Third Order of St. Dominic. So we had good relations with our parish, but it was the kids that really changed my mind. And this is part of the problem. As I mentioned before, I had converted to Catholicism because of the Catholic faith. I had already had my taste of Christian culture and Christian life. I already had my own Christian culture that would go with me wherever I go. And so for me to attend a parish where things weren't as I would like them, I just told myself to be quiet and bear with it. because I'm a big boy. I don't need to have everything be comfortable for me. It's okay. And my wife was the same way. She could roll with things and not complain. But what I've realized is that while I had that strength and my wife had that strength, our kids didn't have that strength. Our kids didn't have that pre-existing commitment to the Catholic faith. They were still in the process of learning and making judgments about things in their lives. And their experience at our local parish led them to some bad conclusions. And I started, I've always blamed them for those decisions, because I can see how if they were stronger mentally or more virtuous, they could overcome those obstacles and do their duty, which is how I tend to look at things. But when I consider them more as disciples of this religion and consider the overall message that they've received, and remember that they don't have the experience and lessons that I had before I converted to Catholicism, I began to realize how different their view of the church was than mine. And so it was really, as I reflected on the opinions and experiences and even feelings of my kids, that I started to realize just how negatively influential our local parish had been in their lives. And they were eager to go to a different parish. So 2 weeks ago, we transferred our membership from our local parish to this parish in South Carolina. Now, I never would have advised that for anyone. And usually the discussions that relate to these things are always centered around two controversial arguments about the Latin Mass. And the reason why someone is leaving a parish is because they don't have the Latin Mass, and we want a parish that has the Latin Mass. And I would always object to that. And, I still object to that, because personally, I just don't think the Latin Mass is that big of a deal. Again, maybe I'm wrong, because, like I said, I'm persuaded of the Catholic faith on theological grounds. And so I really don't put much stock in my experience at Mass. I'm there for the sacrament. I know what to focus on, and I know what to ignore, and I really don't care about a lot of the accidental details of the liturgy and the celebration and things like that. I don't pay attention to other people, or, oh, well, they're not reverent, or they're not dressed I really don't care about those things. Because, like I said, I go to Mass for the sacrament, and I'm pretty good at minding my own business and focusing on what I'm supposed to focus on. But I haven't been considerate for the experience of my children. And that's what's really dawned on me recently and changed my opinion about something of a blind dedication to a local parish. So what it is that I would like to retract, if I could, and maybe if I've ever talked about these things and upset anyone who's listened to talks or read articles, I would like to apologize if I've spoken strongly against moving to different parishes and things like that, because I admit I've always answered those questions from my own perspective as an individual. And I've never really considered those questions from the perspective of others. And I don't want to sound arrogant when I say this, but I haven't considered this from the position of those who might be weaker in faith than I am. And I don't say that to exalt myself. I'm just saying I'm very settled and strong in the Catholic faith, and there's not much that can shake me, and I'm willing to bear with a lot. And that's why when I say some who are not as strong, I don't mean they're not faithful. I just mean maybe they struggle with the faith a little more, and their experience in the parish becomes unbearable for them sometime. Or maybe their situation is even worse than what I've experienced. But what I've had to realize is I haven't really thought about this from the perspective of the weaker people, my children, for example, people who are, learning about the faith, really not firmly committed to the Catholic faith itself, but are looking for some verification and some encouragement from their experience at the parish. I just don't think of it like that. And I think from my conversations with my kids and my recent experience, I don't think I was sensitive to thinking about this from that perspective. And I think things that I have said on the topic weren't thought through carefully enough from the perspective of other eyes, as it were. And so I do want to clarify what I've said on this topic in the past, and realize that the negative effect of a modern parish, and again, I want to be really careful here, because what I'm saying is limited to specific things, and it's not some kind of swipe at the Catholic Church or some do whatever you want recommendation, because I experienced that as a Protestant, and I know how stupid and ugly that can be, where people just spend their whole Christian life bouncing from one place to another. And that in no way is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about people who criticize priests and criticize parishes and then go to another place, and after a few weeks they're criticizing that place, and they just bounce and bounce and bounce. That's what Protestants often do. And that church hopping is not what I'm talking about, but a sincere concern that a certain parish that happens to be geographically close by may actually have a negative effect on our family life is something that I realize we have to be much more careful with, because there could be enough at the local parish to sustain us as adults who are already settled on the Catholic faith, but there may not be enough in that local parish for our children who are still deciding whether this is what they want as their religion, as their church family, and so on. And I think we've got to be more careful about those things. So, just to share a little more of the details, we attended this new parish, and my wife was secretly asking God to show us a sign, something that would confirm that this is a good idea for us to attend this other parish. And here's what happened, which was pretty funny. At our old parish, my wife and I, when we converted to Catholicism, we were already praying the Anglican prayer book. We were already accustomed to liturgical worship. We were already accustomed to liturgical prayer, even in our family, which is very rare for someone to come into the Catholic Church and already be experienced with liturgical family prayer at home. So when we came into the Catholic Church, I quickly found the Liturgy of the Hours, and we started praying the Liturgy of the Hours almost as soon as we became Catholics, because we were already accustomed to that sort of routine daily prayer as Anglicans. I was invited to go and spend a couple of weeks with the Missionaries of the Poor in Jamaica at their monastery, where they pray the Liturgy of the Hours every day, and I got to just sit there in their monastery for 2 weeks and learn to pray the Liturgy of the Hours. And so when I came home from that trip to Jamaica, I brought that knowledge of how to pray the Liturgy of the Hours, and I taught my family, and we began praying the Liturgy of the Hours every day as a family. And again, this was 2008, 2009. So we were just still new Catholics, but we were already doing the things we were supposed to be doing, and we were very well disciplined at that time. I was asked at one point to help teach RCIA, and the parish priest at the time asked if I would teach the lesson on prayer. He wanted me to teach about prayer to these candidates for entrance into the church. So I went through the catechism in preparation for this class that I was to teach, and I prepared a lesson on the different forms of prayer in the Catholic Church. And so I went through the sacred liturgy, the liturgy of the Eucharist, for example, and I went through the most common and basic Catholic prayers, the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, the acts of faith, hope, charity, and contrition. I went through all the basic prayers, went through the rosary, things like that, and then finally got to the Liturgy of the Hours, and I started to explain that there is an official prayer, an official daily prayer of the Catholic Church. It's called the Liturgy of the Hours, and I was explaining the Liturgy of the Hours to the students that were in this RCIA class. And it's worth noting that one of the students who I was teaching and having most of the conversation with was an Oxford philosophy graduate who was a local university philosophy professor, who was a converting Anglican. So you can imagine he and I had a lot in common. And another one of the students in the RCIA class was a local Southern Baptist preacher who was considering converting to the Catholic faith. So these were two big, potential converts in terms of significance locally. And these guys were all into the lesson on prayer, just loads of questions, really interested and most interested in the Liturgy of the Hours. So we were talking about that in the class and going back and forth, and everything was fine. And class ended, everybody left, and the priest tore into me for talking about the Liturgy of the Hours, criticizing me about how no one needs to know about that. There's no reason to talk about things like that. These people aren't ready for that. On and on, criticizing me for talking about the Liturgy of the Hours in a lesson on Catholic prayer at RCIA. And the engagement of the students in the class proved that everything he said was wrong. And finally, he got sort of, smart with me and said, "You don't hear confessions. You don't know what these people need." And I said, "That's true. So if knowledge of confessions, if hearing confessions is a prerequisite for teaching RCIA, then I shouldn't teach RCIA." And so that was it. I said, "I'm happy not to teach this class. So if only you can really teach this class properly, then you should do it. So that's fine. I don't care about that." So that was one weird experience, was that I was criticized by the parish priest for teaching, converting students in an RCIA class about the Liturgy of the Hours, the official prayer of the Catholic Church. And that was bizarre to me, but I like I said, I really didn't care. Another time, that same priest visited our house and criticized us for homeschooling and told us that we should send our kids to the public school. And he criticized us, saying that homeschool children never get a chance to see the world outside of their own home and family, and they're not well prepared for adult life. The one thing that the priest wasn't aware of was that he was visiting us the night before we were scheduled to leave to take the entire family to stay with the missionaries of the poor in Jamaica for a whole month. So we had the priest telling us about how our children are not going to experience the world and see things outside of their own family life and culture. And, he said this as we were packed and ready to leave for a month-long trip to a ghetto in Jamaica to work with the missionaries of the poor. That was how ridiculous this parish experience was for us. And then with the most recent pastor, we've just never had any encouragement in these things. And unfortunately, and this is my fault, unfortunately, as our kids got older and life got busier, a lot of our disciplines had weakened. Obviously, my wife and I continue praying the Liturgy of the Hours every day. We do that as Dominicans. We continue studying and praying. But we stopped doing that as a family because, again, we've got kids going to college, kids getting older, everyone on different schedules and things like that. Even my wife and I working on different schedules. And our ability at this point in our life to recite the Liturgy of the Hours regularly was sort of lost or neglected. And our kids, knowing that the local parish didn't recommend praying the Liturgy of the Hours, they started to buck against it when they knew that there wasn't support for it from the parish priests. And so we were stuck in a difficult situation where we were trying to instill a discipline in the kids and accustom them to a discipline of prayer that was actually being scoffed at by the parish leadership. So we had what felt like a no-win situation. And my reasoning as I sort of laxed or slackened on things was, look, the church doesn't actually require this of our children in the precepts of the church. So I don't think this is something that we should really fight about or give the kids a hard time about. I want to pray the Liturgy of the Hours. My wife wants to pray the Liturgy of the Hours. In fact, we have to because of our life as lay Dominicans, but to really push this on the kids, that's not something that we'd want to argue and fight about. So let's just chill out with that. And that's what's been going on for the past, year or so, maybe 2 years. So anyway, fast forward to 3 weeks ago, we decide to visit this parish in South Carolina. We get there, we get through the reading of the scriptures, and we get to the homily, and guess what the topic of discussion is? The first time we ever attend this parish. We just happened, in God's providence, to stumble into this parish as they began a new series in the homilies where the parish priest is leading the entire congregation in learning to pray the Liturgy of the Hours. The first homily we ever hear at this new parish. The priest is starting a new series of talks he's giving during the homilies where he is leading the entire parish in beginning to pray the Liturgy of the Hours. And this is how wild this parish is. This parish actually purchased subscriptions to Bishop Barron's new Liturgy of the Hours booklets for the entire parish, for every adult member and family in the parish. And the priest, in the homilies on Sunday, is teaching the congregation how to pray the Liturgy of the Hours. That was our first homily ever received at this new parish. So imagine for us the past experience at our old parish, my wife asking God to give us a sign that this is good for us to do this, and having the first week we attend be the beginning of a series promoting the recitation of the Liturgy of the Hours by the entire parish. So for us, that was as clear a confirmation as we can get. Now, that's not the best part. The best part was that all of my children were present. And all of my children got to hear this parish priest explain why we need to pray the Liturgy of the Hours at home as families. They got to hear everything articulated from the pulpit that I had taught them in our family, but never had support from our local parish. That was the first week. I didn't make any changes. I was sort of overwhelmed by all of the stuff I was learning about the new parish and so on. And then today, the priest, this is Sunday, this was Pentecost Sunday. You can look this up on YouTube and see the actual homily. The pastor of the parish actually led the entire parish through praying evening prayer for June 1st so that the whole parish could begin praying the Liturgy of the Hours on June 1st, this upcoming week. And we came home after Mass, and my kids immediately began to ask, so are we going to start praying Liturgy of the Hours again? And on the way to Mass this morning, I told my wife, starting Monday, 7 a.m., we're getting back to praying the Liturgy of the Hours together as a family every day. And they didn't hear that or know that, but when we got home after the Mass, the kids were asking, are we going to get back to praying the Liturgy of the Hours? Now this devotion, which they all complained about before and fussed at, all of a sudden they're asking if we're going to pick that practice back up. And tonight, thanks be to God, Pentecost Sunday was the first time in at least a year, like I said, maybe 2 years, that we sat and all prayed evening prayer together. And for me, considering how much damage our old parish has had in my kids' lives, to see my kids sitting around a table again, praying evening prayer with me, was almost miraculous, because like I said, I decided that I wasn't going to press Liturgy of the Hours on my kids. I wasn't going to fight with them about it. I wasn't going to demand that they participate in it. But we used to, and we had stopped, though my wife and I continued. But tonight we had our first family evening prayer together. And I can honestly say that if we were at our old parish, that would not be true. And I can also honestly say that this new parish and this new priest are the reason why my kids were sitting at the table in the kitchen, ready for evening prayer this evening for the first time in a couple years. And this is what ultimately made me realize that my idea that it was virtuous to be faithful to the local parish, to the geographically local parish, to just commit to it like a marriage, do what you can to improve it, and never consider going anyplace else. That was true. That argument that I make would be true if I was a single man. But that argument is not true for a man who's the head of a household with children who are still growing in the faith and aren't stable yet in that faith. They need to be convinced that the Catholic Church is true. They need to be incorporated into the life of a parish. They need to have fellowship in the parish. They need to know that, they need to respect the priest in their parish. They need to see the faith presented respectably. And in our old parish, I really was insensitive to just how negatively influential those failures in our old parish were. And it wasn't until I brought my children to a different parish, which is, I hate to say it, but it's a different universe. Seeing their response within a couple of weeks has just been amazing to me. I really never imagined how much of the struggles I saw in my kids as Catholics was being caused by our parish. And I also could never have imagined how quickly things would turn around if they were brought into a better environment. Like I said, it's been a matter of 3 Sundays, and these things have made a turn 180 degrees. So I want to wrap up having said that, because it's just a little after 11, and I'm sure that I've got a wife and kids waiting for me to pray night prayer tonight, because we're back to praying Liturgy of the Hours. Thanks be to God. And like I said, it's entirely owed to changing parishes, which I never thought was a good idea, but I was wrong.